The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it, midweek editions here at Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Hope you do it all right. Not a good one for Nebraska baseball. We'll get in there, hear from Will Bolt. And Nebraska tries to dust themselves off for conference play this weekend. Scott Frost speaks over breakfast, kind of. We'll dive into the Dennis Dodd sit-down with him. And plenty to dive into as well with Mike Babcock from Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports Babbers with us in about 15 minutes and in hour two. Evan Bland, he was at the Chuck last night for Nebraska and Creighton. And plenty of spring football thoughts from Evan as well. Tim Verghese going to join us, recruiting insider with Rivals. So excited to spend some time with him as we welcome him into the show at a Jock Doc before we wind down. Numbers to get in, 489-1240, 489-1240, 800-825-5865. Those are the numbers to dial up. Wherever you hear us across the Hail Varsity Radio Network, and email the show, chris@hailvarsity.com. And find us on the stream, Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Like, subscribe to that. The different platforms can hear us as well across the state, radio or social. Elijah, how we doing? I know you had bowling last night. You kept an ear towards Nebraska baseball, as did I. Pretty intrigued about some spring football topics with the defense we can get into as well on the heels of Tony White. Tomorrow, how about a quarterback sighting or three, perhaps, after the practice wraps up for the media session? So that'll be pretty intriguing. We'll get to the starting five as we'll shout out our folks here in the stream. But listen, we'll get to Nebraska baseball and just the missed opportunity. Just watching the post game from Will Bolt, and he's an intense dude anyway. Will's awesome, but just he was PO'd, man. He was PO'd. He was ticked off, and it was a little bit out of character from what you've seen and experienced with this Nebraska baseball team so far. On the flip side, Creighton was really good with their bats, with their pitching, and what they wanted to do. I know a little bit of a deflator, and Creighton's a bugaboo anyway in the last 11 games in that rivalry matchup. But you come in ranked, and you leave wanting more if you're Nebraska baseball. Just a couple of errors. Nebraska's been really pretty good with runners in scoring position with their back against the wall. They had better situations with less than 2 outs to get some runs home and couldn't make it happen. So kind of a tough one for Nebraska last night. So Jeff Snitley is in from the Boulder Peace Treaty. He is first. Brandon checks in as we do our starting five. Shout-outs, says hello. Crew checks in third. Tim Wolf is here. Patrick Black Hills Brennan says tardy. Whenever I hear the word tardy, I think of David Lee Roth before Hot for the Teacher. I don't feel tardy. You're just looking through my soul right now.
No, I know. I get the reference. It's just you're old.
No, it's David Lee Roth is old.
Yes.
I'm getting older, but I don't feel tardy. Thank you, Brennan. You're on time.
Speaking of David Lee Roth, have you ever heard the story of? It's apparently a true story by all I can figure out of this guy. Where his girlfriend...
Let's reset for our younger audience. David Lee Roth, the original lead singer of Van Halen.
Yes. R.I.P. Eddie Van Halen, by the way.
Right.
But this guy, I guess we started with his girlfriend. He is a new boyfriend for this lady, and she's just getting all concerned because he is getting calls at all hours of the night, on like his home phone. And it's all asking for...
Who's old? You're talking about home phone lines.
Yeah, I'm saying this is like a late 80s, early 90s thing. And she is just like, what is going on? And she like picks up the phone, starts picking up, and they're all asking for David, and that's her boyfriend's name. And she's like, why are all these people calling, most of them women, trying to talk to David? That's my boyfriend. Turns out he had gotten like the old phone number of like David Lee Roth's phone number had gotten out, so he had to change phone numbers. And this guy gets stuck with David Lee Roth's old phone number, so like all these
He's
people
just
are calling,
phone calls
looking for David Lee Roth, and by happenstance his name was also David, so his girlfriend almost broke up with him. I think the story goes that they ended up getting married and changing phone numbers, and it was a happy story in the end.
That's good. The story I have of David Lee Roth is not firsthand, but I have a friend, and you know him well, L. Kent Walgamont.
Ah, yes.
L. Kent got to go on a couple-leg tour with David Lee Roth at his solo tour. So he was on the bus with David Lee Roth and the crew, and hilarity ensued. That's all I've been able to get out of El Kent in 15-plus years.
Any hunting knives a la Zach Brown?
No Zach Brown survival kits, but but David Lee Roth in the 80s was probably a good time if you lived to tell about it. KG is in. He says, what's up? Said, dang, old parole officer took extra long with my drug test. Otherwise, I'd have been first today. God love you, KG. Keep making that parole officer happy. Brandon is in. Justin is here. Brian here. Also, Tuck. Somebody shut the portal door already. Good grief. We've got the Avengers-sized portal door going for Nebraska basketball. Jeff is in. Tim says, what's up? We'll get to more of your comments as well. But real quick thought before we talk some Scott Frost, Dennis Dodd, and some spring football topics. This'll be okay. I'm gonna put some lipstick on this for Nebraska baseball. What I don't expect Nebraska baseball to do the next time against Creighton, or even the third time. And I'm not saying they win the series. I'm not saying they find a way to win. Creighton's a good baseball team. But I don't envision Nebraska's approach to be as poor. And when I say that, they had 14 strikeouts. They haven't taken care of the baseball as well as they've wanted to do this season, but it bit them a couple of times. And just from taking what's there, getting on base with the situational hitting, Nebraska's been high level this year. And they've been pretty good against some good opponents. So more of a credit to Creighton last night, but I just, they'll be better, presumably, or at least they'll have better at-bats from the get-go. They didn't have good at-bats. They got in that whole 5-0 early, battled back. It was good to see Will Jeske at least get an RBI with that ground out. He made something happen with the guy on third. We're part of the Will Jeske fan club here, but a lot of the other guys just didn't make it happen. The other part of it, Creighton's lineup 2, 3, and 4 did well, but their 8-hole hitter
that's where I was going to go.
Their 8-hole hitter absolutely killed Nebraska. 3 for 4.
8 and 9 just were setting up 1, 2, 3 in the batting order.
Right.
And, you can't have that in baseball. The number one takeaway I have from last night was just how many times Creighton was able to pump in a first pitch strike where the Husker batter just did not look like they were even ready to hit on the first pitch of the AB. And I think that comes down to approach. The Husker batters were not aggressive enough on the first pitch. I mean, how many times do you see a first pitch fastball, a great pitch to hit, just get pumped right in there for a strike, and now you're down in the count? Felt like a good 10 times last night I saw that, maybe more. So that was disappointing. And the defense not being on its A game, that's disappointing. But the end takeaway is you only lost by 2, and if baseball is 12 innings instead of 9, which it isn't, but if that baseball game is 12 innings...
God knows we need longer baseball games.
I somewhat liked Nebraska's momentum in the later innings.
Yeah.
Didn't hate it. I think you have a chance if that one goes 12. Obviously, you didn't. You got yourself too far behind the 8 ball early in that one. The innings 2 and 3 were rough. It's not completely discouraging, but that's what happens whenever you step up the competition. I think last night was the proof that Creighton was a step up in competition from anyone Nebraska.
You've been asking the question on the Triple Play podcast with Jabba Chamberlain. You've been asking the question not as a heel, but you've been asking the question, how good is Nebraska? And last night, it showed that there's some work to do with this ball club against higher level opponents. And with Creighton, they don't have maybe the strength of schedule or the RPI you do, but when it comes to the level of intensity, and it's not that Nebraska's not intense with this rivalry game. It's not that Nebraska's not intense with Will Bolt, but Creighton's mocking Go Big Red chants from their clubhouse. I mean, they hate Nebraska, and
it's evidenced by the fact they've won 7 of the last 8.
Sure, I mean they turn it up, and it's their man. It's service saying, "Look, dude, it's been circled." I don't want to say it's got a Colorado feel, but it's more towards the Colorado feel than a Nebraska-Oklahoma feel, where there's the mutual respect. Creighton's probably sick of not getting their due around the state as the baseball program, and that can be a rather large chip on both shoulders, and they bring it every time they play Nebraska.
They do, and you know what you saw last night? You saw a team that brought it, that I think for the first time since at least Wichita State, if not the opening weekend down in Texas, that was just as good as you are. And they had more intensity last night. It looked like they wanted it more last night. And whenever you've been playing teams that I think it's not wrong to do so, to schedule teams that you should be expected to beat in the non-con. That's what I think Nebraska's done this year. It's not a pushover non-conference by any means, but just about every team you faced in your non-conference was a team that you're expected to beat. Nebraska did what was expected of them. Now you face a team that's just as good as you, that felt like they had more intensity on Tuesday night, and that's the result you get. I think Nebraska stepped up and kind of accepted that challenge as the game went on. I think they settled into that game a little bit, but it was too little too late following what Creighton did in those first couple of innings, jumping out 5-0. So it's not complete discouragement from me. I just think it is that wake-up call of, hey, you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. And I think Nebraska need a wake-up call. You're not as good as you think you are despite the 10-game winning streak. You've been beating teams that you really should be going out there and beating. You've done it in impressive fashion, but whenever you got a team that's just as good as you can't just ride talent to victory. You got to be able to bring it every single night. And I don't think Nebraska brought it last night like you expected them to based on how the season's gone so far, but it's still not last season. It's still not the completely dead midweek games that we saw last year. I think rising to the challenge as the game went on was impressive, and you know what? That can be a good sign, a good wake-up call for you as you enter Big Ten play. You face some more teams that you're expected to beat, to not rest on your laurels, to understand there's a lot of other teams out there that are very good at baseball that are the teams you're going to have to beat if you do make a regional in May.
Well, see how you respond to this. Use this as for sure some motivation, but also a lesson in approach next time you take on a team that's as good as you or better, at least on a given night, and you're going to have some of those important series that loom against Maryland, against Rutgers, against Iowa, where you got to do your work in the Big Ten. You have Ohio State that has been scuffling, but there's dudes that are high-level talent that have ended up in Columbus. They're not what they were. Oh, thank you, Jeff Snitley. So,
yeah, we need to go.
We need to go here. So, I did politely ask Elijah to make a swing through the 56th and Holdridge Runza this morning. I got the go to hell.
It was not that harsh. Let it be known.
The text. I was just reading the text in my mind about the tone because I was stuck in the studio, but our friend Kevin Suits from 1011 took some footage of what the line looked like. And in Lincoln, with the breakfast Runza, one day only, location at the original Runza, or the second original Runza, however you want to deem it, streets east and westbound on Holdridge were blocked off. You could not access said Runza drive-through if you're traveling northbound on 56th. You had to come in from the north, driving south, and it looked like the end of Field of Dreams. And that's how long the car lines were. The right lane was free to zip through. The left lane, good luck and God bless trying to get in that drive-through.
Yeah, it's something we talked about yesterday. How do you want to start your day? My alarm went off this morning, 7:25. I get up to make myself some coffee, and I see the first video of the line was at just after 7:30. It gets posted, and I go, oh no, that line's already long, and they're not even opening for half an hour. But I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to sit in line, I'm going to finish my coffee. So I finish making my coffee, and this is closer to 7:50. And there's
when the 8 o'clock drop happens.
Yeah, and then the more footage gets posted, and I go, nah, that line is a half mile long. I am not going to go sit on that. Sorry, everyone that wanted Elijah Herbel's review of the breakfast runs. There was plans to do it, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, how do you want to start your day? And for me, it was not sitting in line for an hour for a runza that I wasn't going to get because the report was there was only 200, and I was like, there's no chance. So I was not going to waste my morning with it. I had a lovely walk with my dogs, though.
Well played. Plenty of online reviews. The eggs were solid. The ham and green pepper, good. The cream cheese and cheese, very delectable. Brian says, by the picture of the runzas, there appeared to be no cabbage killed in the making of breakfast runza. I don't know that you could have incorporated cabbage.
Oh, you can always incorporate cabbage.
It just doesn't bode well for that breakfast setup. But it looked like a runza. We had one brought to the station this morning. I didn't get it. I wasn't going to fight the guy who brought it. I will patiently wait for this thing to be a real thing Monday through Sunday. Mike Babcock, he was not in line for a run, but he'll talk baseball next.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Tim Verghese is going to be with us in the 5 o'clock hour. What's the 2025 recruiting radar look like for Nebraska football at quarterback and beyond? Tim Verghese, of course, with rivals Nebraska, joining us here in 1 hour. Mike Babcock with Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports in the stream now at MD Babs on Twitter. Get his bi-weekly newsletter at Mike B at hurrdatsports.com, where you can send an email and get that mailer sent to you. Babbers, how we doing? Good to spend a few minutes with you.
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Yeah, it is. It is good to spend a few minutes with you guys. I learn things. I take notes when you're talking before I come on, so I can agree with everything you said.
Well, and can you agree with our stream contingent that say no cabbage, no coffee for the breakfast combo?
You know, I don't drink coffee and I don't eat cabbage, so that's probably I would say no. You probably wouldn't put those together. I wouldn't take either one. So
on the flip side of things, could be a hell of a way to start the day.
No.
You could look at it as a bad way to start the day. You could also look at it as like you're bringing a little excitement to your Wednesday by starting your day that way, you know? Like life gets a little bit, routine. You have the run of the mill. What better way to break up the routine than coffee and cabbage at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, you know?
That's a real hard pass, period.
I thought maybe.
The coffee is necessary at some mornings, the cabbage never. Maybe on St. Patty's Day.
Maybe you could make coleslaw with it. I'd probably go there.
Okay, so Babbers will audible to said coleslaw. Reaction. We'll hear from Will Bolt in about 15 minutes. A thought from you, Babbers, on Nebraska and Creighton last night.
Speaking as a fan, not as an impartial journalist, I was disappointed that it came to that. I thought it was going to be like the series against College of Charleston, where Nebraska came back at the end of the game in the late innings to win 3 of those games. And I thought that's what was going to happen, or I guess in the back of my mind, I was hoping that was going to happen. Because Nebraska had just gotten in the rankings, the national rankings this week. And, to go against an in-state rival like that, I thought, well, despite the bad start, you're going to finish strong like you did, like you have shown that you can do. Mm-hmm. And when that didn't happen, it was kind of a disappointment. But, I think Creighton came ready to play, and I'm not sure that Nebraska came ready to play at the beginning, at least. And when you fall behind, 5-0, then you got to battle back. It's a different kind of a situation that you have to deal with. And I didn't think, again, they didn't deal with it badly. And as Elijah said, if you're playing 12 innings, for some reason, you don't go extra innings though when the score is 5-3 after 9. So that didn't work for the Huskers. But maybe it's a wake-up call. Maybe Creighton went into that game more focused than Nebraska did. But certainly the important thing is conference play, and you've got a conference series with Ohio State. And maybe this will bring into focus a little bit better for the Huskers. When you win 10 in a row, I guess you start to think maybe you're not as focused as you should be, because you start to think, hey, we're pretty good. We're rolling right through these teams.
And yeah, Mike, it's little things that showed me a lack of focus last night, with errors in the field, both throwing and then on seemingly routine plays. You had some walks. The approach at the plate didn't look great. You had a lot of runners left on base. Just all little things that lead me to believe that the focus wasn't quite there early in the game. And again, as Schmidt said, we'll hear some thoughts from Will Bolt, what he thought about the game. But I don't think it's all bad. I don't think it's all negative. The biggest negative is that you've lost 7 of 8 to Creighton. And it's pretty clear at this point in time that Creighton takes this rivalry more seriously than Nebraska does, which is disappointing based on what we saw last night. But at the end of the day, it's a one-off game where I do think you settled into the game as it went on. You showed some fight. You just couldn't overcome your early mistakes, your early lapses in focus. And that's going to happen in baseball. It's all about how you respond, how do you come back, and what do you do in a weekend series against Ohio State. That's what it is to me. Is you don't want to put too much stock into one game, even if it's a rivalry, even if it's a team you really want to beat. That happens in baseball. It's tough to focus and keep a high level of focus through a whole season. You wish it didn't happen against an in-state rival, but it does happen. It's all about how you respond to me.
Yeah, and you have 2 more opportunities against Creighton, but I mean the focus has to be first and foremost the Big Ten, obviously, and that's what you got up next.
Mike, going to shift away from baseball to Scott Frost speaking for the first time in 18 months. Sat down with Dennis Dodd. We've crossed paths with Dennis Dodd in our past, be it as a guest or just at different media settings, from the Big 12 to the Big 8 to the Big 10 or media days. And, you had 70 minutes, and I'm not a writer, dude. I'm not smart enough to be a writer. That said, there just wasn't a lot on what the hell happened in Nebraska. Why, or much to the why it went so bad in Lincoln for Frost, who desperately wants to get back in, be it a lower level job, be it a spot that is a coordinator, or, it's been 2 coaching cycles, and there's been 52 openings, and Frost wants to get in. Now, your reaction to the interview, the sit down, the article was really not as in-depth as maybe you thought could have been. And I'm not blaming Dennis. I'm just speaking out loud. Maybe that's all that Scott would answer. What did you think of?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Maybe that was all Scott would answer. I was a little bit surprised, but looking at it, I guess I shouldn't be, that Scott did the interview. Because I think that he's had some perspective now, and he's learned some things by what his experience was at Nebraska and at Central Florida. I mean, he has limited, relatively speaking, experience as a head coach. He had a really good resume as an assistant coach. He had really good success at Central Florida in the short term, but he wasn't there very long. And then he made it, I think it was a significant jump from Central Florida to becoming the head coach at the University of Nebraska, particularly since he played here. And, so the expectations were magnified by the fact that he played here. I don't think he understood exactly what it meant to be the head coach at the University of Nebraska, regardless of the fact that he had played here. And I think that's where I was surprised that he's ready to talk a little bit, because he wants to get into coaching at some level again.
Are you surprised based on what you observed and we all covered, that if it comes down to it, he lived the expectations, but that was a different bar. I mean, it was. He was part of those squads that were printing titles. And to come resurrect them was not an easy job. It's still not an easy job. It's not been an easy job for the other guys that preceded him and have followed him.
No, and it's overstating probably and a cliche to some extent, but his initial comment about the Big Ten having to adjust to Nebraska, what he did, that showed that things, in retrospect, that showed things probably weren't going to go very well, that you had to make the adjustment because you're the coach coming in and trying to get this program turned around in a conference that played in a certain way. Now, it's going to change probably with USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. Maybe it's not going to be quite the same, but when Scott came in as coach, it wasn't something that you wanted to say probably that, hey, they're going to have to adjust to us, because that didn't happen. And that sort of reflected, I think, his understanding of what he was getting into.
And Mike, with that kind of in mind, the expectations, how it ended up at Nebraska, I mean, really utter failure is what you can call it. I don't want to be too harsh, but that is the term I'd use. Did this piece from Dennis Dodd, do you feel like a bit of a puff piece? And I don't want to use that term too lightly, so call me out if I'm completely wrong on it. That was my first reaction upon reading it was, well, Dennis Dodd posted a Scott Frost puff piece. Is that fair?
Well, I guess I would agree with you about that. And like I said, I'm surprised that Scott agreed to do it. And so if you're Dennis Dodd and you say, hey, would you do this? And he says, well, I'll do this. And you take what you can get in that situation, because, again, I was surprised that Scott agreed to do it at this point. But if he says he's going to do it and you're Dennis Dodd, hey, let's see what he has to say. And if it emerges as a puff piece, so be it. But you did it. You got something that we haven't seen since he left Nebraska, really.
Mike, is Scott Frost coaching a year from now?
Personally, I would think so. Because he didn't have success here. It wasn't like he broke a bunch of rules or did a bunch of things that were in that area of evaluating a coach. He just didn't have the success that people expected at Nebraska. And he does have, that brief success at Central Florida, and he does have experience as an assistant coach. Very good resume, I think, as an assistant coach. And personally, I hope he does. I hope he is back coaching if that's what he wants to do, because I would be supportive of wherever he is in that sense. I don't have negative feelings about him. He was the guy that spoke up for Nebraska in 1997 after the bowl game and basically laid it out. Here's the case for Nebraska to be national champions. Very passionate about that, and I think some people never quite forgave him, even with the national championship, for going to Stanford out of high school.
Well, Mike, I think he should be coaching next year with the years he spent in college football with. I mean, it's pretty accepted, myself included, how brilliant of an offensive mind he is. He should be coaching somewhere in college football next season. The question is can he get over the optics of how it ended at Nebraska? That's the only question.
Well, and what's he doing? Is he a coordinator or is he a head coach? Some guys are one, not the other.
Analyst.
That's a thought. Babbers, we'll check in next week. Appreciate you jumping on, man, and talking some ball.
Thanks for having me, guys.
There he is. Find Mike Babcock with Hail Varsity and Hurrdat Sports at MD Babs on Twitter.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Some of your comments in the stream as to where Frosty lands next are pretty good. KG may not be far off. Welcome back to Hail Varsity, 489-1240. Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Hail Varsity YouTube channel where you can stream the video and just catch us on the Hail Varsity Radio Network. So KG says, have him join Ohio State next season. There's familiarity with Day, and of course Chip Kelly is there. That's one thing. Eat beef off the top rope with steel chair in hand. Coordinator for A&M. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good.
We'll spend a minute or two here on the Dennis Dodd article. If you haven't read it, it is pretty vanilla.
That is a great way to put it.
And sometimes vanilla is great, but not in this instance.
Well, can I just say, like, I do think Scott Frost, if his next gig is as a head coach, I do legitimately believe Scott Frost could find success as a head coach in college football at his next gig. I think it has to be the right situation for Scott, and I don't think he had the right situation at Nebraska at all. I think in hindsight, looking back, what looked on the outside as a great hire was just that, was from an outside perspective, surface level great hire. I think you dove a little deeper into who Scott Frost is as a football coach and where Nebraska was at and what they needed, and it was not a fit. But I think there could be a fit out there in college football for Scott Frost for him to return immediately back to head coaching. A lot of people out there have thrown out coordinator, analyst, myself included. But I would like to say, I am not out on Scott Frost being a good head football coach. I think he can be. I think he really, really needs to find the right next stop for him, though, if he wants to remain a head coach and not go to some school of coaching a la Lane Kiffin going and reviving his career under Nick Saban. If he wants to be a head coach at his next stop, I just think it really has to be the right next stop.
To me, he is going to need to find a Saban-esque type rehab landing spot. And Saban's retired, but Saban got Lane Train back in line, Sark back in line. They both went on to find successful spots. Of course, Sark doing things at Texas, Lane doing work at Ole Miss. You have an agent for Scott that step one of this rehab process is getting in front of the media. And Dennis Dodd is somebody at a national level with CBS that is going to do the interview, probably not stomp or step all over you. And it's a first step. He now needs to find TV, radio, and be visible if there's still no phone calls. And I don't know what's been turned down by Scott. I have a hard time believing with 52 openings the last two coaching cycles that Scott's not been contacted. I have a hard time believing he's probably not interviewed. I think he's probably felt some feelers and was looking. And he was really selective at Central Florida to even take that job because he was doing so well. And it's not from an ability standpoint, but he was at Northern Iowa a long time, probably too long for as good as he is. And then he landed with Chip Kelly, and that really worked well. The guy recruited three pretty good quarterbacks. Mariota, Herbert, But also, if things would have been better around Adrian's a good quarterback. Mm-hmm. And that's a good eye for talent to go get. And you saw what happened his freshman year, and it just didn't get any better for Adrian or the team when it came to those close ball games. But from a Frost standpoint, listen, he didn't want to reflect on Nebraska, chose not to really open up or talk to Dennis Dodd about his days at Nebraska. And the quote here...
That's why the piece comes off as a puff piece.
Well, yeah,
you don't want to talk about the elephant in the room.
Right. The quote here is, never wanted to be a critic when it comes to talking about Nebraska. Fine. You're taking the high road. But there are people here that you could sit down with that may not be at a national level, but maybe you start at a local level. Maybe you sit down with Babbers, who you've known for 35 years.
Maybe you sit down with Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Maybe. But I'm just talking, if you wanted to do a non-video or phone interview, you start with the Babbers, you give Sip a ring, you sit with Sam. There's options in state here, okay, that you could take some of those arrows and take some hard questions that you don't want to answer. And maybe, dude, you're going to have to answer them in front of the next AD or the next head coach as to why it didn't work, what's truth, what's rumor. And why did it go horribly? I think he was ultra selective with Central Florida because they had talent there. He still had to coach that talent from an 0-for season to a 6-7 season. So there was NFL dudes on that roster, but they were just wayward. I do believe he fixed that team's passion for football, and then you saw him go undefeated.
That's my question. It's funny you say that because that's like the question to me. What's the next stop for Scott Frost? What is the place that can reignite his passion for football? What did you see at UCF? You saw a guy at the head coaching position along with a team that was having fun with the game. I don't think we... You
know why he had fun?
Outside of the first 6 months at Nebraska.
He was anonymous. He was anonymous in Orlando.
And outside of the first 6 months at Nebraska, did you see a coach that was ever having fun on the sideline?
I saw a guy...
having fun with his team? You saw a guy that was under a world of pressure.
Sure. Well, I saw a guy that felt obligated to come back.
Yeah.
He felt obligated to come back and fix his alma mater. And I think I saw a guy that probably got caught up in the allure of being, dude, I'm the prodigal son coming home to fix things. Everyone's slapping me on the back, and it wasn't an awful first season. There's some excitement, there's some hope, there's some hype, and then you just never got out of your own way. I think if he steps back at age 49, there's got to be some real like self-inventory accountability on how you want to run a program with who you hire. You've got to listen to people, and I love his loyalty, but some of his hires weren't great hires for the Big Ten jump. They were fine for the AAC. But I think it speaks volumes that most of his staff aren't coaching or at a D1 level. Now, Troy Edwards is with Zach Taylor, but he was the first offensive coordinator to get sacrificed. So, listen, you've got to really tap into some of your peers in the coaching fraternity. Take their constructive criticism, maybe you have already, and go hire a monster staff that may challenge you on some things and call you out as head coach. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you're not able to have a civil discourse or discussion about, no, I think X, Y, and Z should be this way. If Arizona, and I know Arizona made a move, but some of those schools, if Arizona State or Arizona opens up ever in the near future for him, he wants to stay in Arizona, possibly. I think he could do well down there.
Well, there's two sides. There's Scott Frost, where he needs to take a book out of Lane's playbook, and like Lane after USC accepted his own shortcomings, both personal and professional, and was able to work on himself via the Nick Saban school of coaching. So that's step one for Scott. And then I think, as I laid out before, you have to find a spot that you can make football fun again, a place that you can go in and enjoy your time, not feel the pressure like you did at Nebraska. Just a place where you can have a smile on your face coaching football again. That's what we didn't see for years with Scott at Nebraska.
Well, you get here and the tug of war is, dude, I want to be the guy. I've got an ego that says I'm going to be the guy to fix Nebraska. But there's also the tug of, man, I know this place and it is a monster I got to feed.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, Evan Bland going to be with us from the Omaha World Herald. His son's on Husker Baseball, Husker Spring Football, the Frost story. Tim Verghese from Rivals, Nebraska. Recruiting look-see as we get going at 5:25 with Tim. Welcome him to the show. Last thought here on Frost as we will wind down this hour. Here's what I believe. I believe that he knows football. I believe that he knows talent. I think he knows how to develop talent. Okay, he's been at programs that have done all three of those. The problem was, and you got to be mature enough to handle the setting, and that's the fishbowl that is Nebraska football. And part of that maturity is communication. Can you lead a staff? Can you pick the right staff? And are you organized? What's if we're just going to go compare and contrast here, and this is not to, again, pour salt on Scott, but what's the thing that Matt Rule's exquisite at? Not only is he able to speak and connect but he's pretty tireless. He's everywhere all the time, but he's still at his best, as good of a communicator as he is on the football field. He's still at his best when it comes to picking a staff right now as it looks. And again, we're not crowning him yet, but it looks and it feels all right with the level of intensity and, again, attention to detail. Matt Rule's organized, dude. He's a grown-up. He is all sorts of planned out, thinking ahead, but also in the moment where, all right, what's his message been? Last year isn't good enough. So the standard for year 2 is going to be all sorts of hell week times 3 for spring football. But it's the end finish line here is it's going to be a whole different ball game, and be prepared for a jump in level of play from opponents you've already seen, let alone some new folks you're not used to in the new Big Ten. It comes down to, are you able to handle the position? And at Central Florida, you had talent, you had it rolling, you beat some good teams, and there wasn't this fishbowl to live in down there in Mickey and Minnie land. And I'm not knocking him. He did a hell of a job. He did great. And he killed a really good Auburn team, or beat a really good Auburn team. But you needed to be more buttoned up, more professional, and above all, communicate and be more organized. That is it. Can you be a different dude, a different leader at your next stop? Because presumably his next stop's going to be I would think he wants to be a head coach. Guys who've tasted the head coaching spot don't want to go work for somebody. That's the mettle you showed at Camp Saban. Can I go work for a freaking tyrant for 3 years and do well and then get his stamp of approval? I'm ready to go fly off on my own.
Yeah, and like that being ready to fly off on your own, I think it's been evidenced at Nebraska, at least in the past decade. These coaches earn their paycheck. It's different to go earn a paycheck and be the head man at a place that's Power 5 as opposed to Middle Tennessee State. I'm just using that as an example. No, nothing against them. Like, there's so much more than just being a football coach at a place like Nebraska. There's a lot more to it in today's era.
The combination of ingredients to come back here, be the prodigal son, and then go fix it. Man, we'll see how it ends next time for him.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. It's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Find us the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Like, subscribe there. Watch the show that way. Can hear us across the Hail Varsity Radio Network and different social platforms. Before we get to Evan, Ken chimes in with his take on the Frost situation with him wanting to get back in coaching, his sit-down with Dennis Dodd. Frost is the genius who never had to study. When classes got hard, he didn't know how to study. And, you had to study and study some more in the Big Ten. You wish him well wherever he lands next. Evan Bland was at the Chuck last night, Omaha World Herald, at Evan Bland, OWH. Evan, we'll start with some baseball before football thoughts. How are you doing? And are you surprised last night in a rivalry game with Nebraska's lack of offense?
Yeah, doing all right. It was a kind of the game that I thought it would be. I mean, it was two teams that were looking for a quad one win. You had the in-state element. You knew there were going to be a bunch of pitchers both ways, and it kind of felt like one of those games where the team that got ahead was going to have a big advantage just because of those arms that they were going to see. And so, I mean, when Creighton gets the home run in the second inning, then they build the lead to 5-0 early on. You just kind of felt like it was going to be tough. And the Jays put out some of their better bullpen arms, and Nebraska got a little bit going late, couldn't find the clutch hit. So I don't know. Like, it's one of those games that certainly Creighton has dominated that particular rivalry over the last 5 or 6 years. And I know that it chaps fans, and it kind of can sit with coaches and players too. But I think from just a postseason resume perspective, it really doesn't ding you too much at all. I mean, Creighton was a top 40 RPI team. That game was on the road for Nebraska, so it was certainly an opportunity, probably on par with the Kansas State game that got canceled because of cold weather. So, when you talk about the goals that are in front of this team, really nothing changes with that game. It was a good game that came down to the ninth inning, and for the first time in 11 games, Nebraska came up on the short end.
Evan, I said in the first hour, I want to get your take on it. It was a game where Nebraska needed it to be 12 innings instead of 9. I feel like if Nebraska would have gotten 12 innings, there's a good chance they would have come out on top. But you just put yourself behind the 8 ball early and didn't have enough time to get back into that once you kind of settled in.
Yeah, that's probably true. Creighton's coach, Ed Service, said they were counting outs as early as like the 3rd inning, just in terms of like how are we going to manage this thing and take it to the finish. And what I think is interesting, and this isn't just true for this year, but it's been true for a few years, is the difference in how the teams approach that game. I mean, Creighton is unabashed about the fact that this is a huge game for them. They don't typically play in front of these sort of intense bipartisan crowds, and so they embrace the moment, and like to the point to where Ed Service wanted his experienced guys in there on the mound early, just because he kind of wanted the younger guys to settle in a little bit. Nebraska takes more of the marathon approach, and it kind of looks internally in its performance, and I think that tends to play out well over the course of a season. But on a single night like that, it did feel like Creighton had more energy, certainly more of a desire to find a way to win, and they ultimately did. But yeah, I mean, I think if the game continued on for another couple innings, if Nebraska had found a way to tie it or what have you, I do think their bullpen depth is probably a little deeper. I think either team would tell you that. And it just didn't quite get to that point for the Huskers last night.
Evan, we had fake Will Bolt tweet into the show and ask the question, or more so the statement. He wants to see Nebraska-Creighton be a weekend series with all the aces throwing. Love the idea. Is that even a possibility?
No, probably not. It is a really interesting idea. You'd love to see what it would be like when both teams do have their weekend rotation guys out there, but especially where Nebraska is located in the Midwest, like you really need to find quality midweek games. Like that's the key. And you've got Wichita State, you've got Kansas State, but you don't have nearly the options that a lot of the warmer weather schools do. So that's a really important game to be able to have on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, where you can just bus. One team just has to bus somewhere, and you don't have to fly and worry about scheduling and all that. And I think it's even going to be more the case moving forward with the Big Ten expanding to 17 baseball teams. You're going to have a couple more conference weekends, so you really have only 2 or 3 weekend openings to even schedule something like that. And you want to get creative if you're Nebraska for RPI purposes. Maybe you want to travel in that time. Certainly the weather's not as warm, so I think you're just kind of destined to have it be what it is. Now, if like D1 baseball's regional projection comes to fruition, and Creighton comes to Lincoln for a regional in early June, that could be a totally different deal. And maybe that's kind of the only realistic path to both teams maybe putting their best foot forward in terms of pitching. So probably not something you want to hold your breath on, but it really has been a valuable midweek game for both sides.
Evan, what's your take on this? Like, one-off game against Creighton or a weekend series against Ohio State? Creighton's the better baseball team. Ohio State's the conference opponent, and you have 3 games against them. Which on its face this week is more important to you?
I mean, probably I would still say Ohio State. I mean, that's a team that has been down for the last 5 or 6 years, and they're suddenly coming in with a new coaching regime, and they're playing 500 ball against a pretty tough schedule. So that's not a team that you can necessarily expect to walk all over either. And if Nebraska wants to win the Big Ten and move forward, like that's an important series you have to take. And so like when you see national outlets predicting Nebraska to host a regional, that optimism at this point is not coming from this idea that they're going to win every midweek game. It's coming from the idea that these are going to be weekend victories for Nebraska moving forward. So like you can't really, you can afford a mulligan against Creighton, given that Creighton came in at 20-4 and that's a single game. You can't as much afford to lose a series, especially at home, to an Ohio State team that you probably need to beat to keep pace atop the conference standings. So I would still say that's the more intriguing one to me. Nebraska Creighton will meet up at 2 more times, weather permitting, in the next month or so. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I do think there's more to gain and maybe even a little bit more to lose with these weekend series than there are in the midweek.
Evan Bland with us from the Omaha World Herald. Thoughts on Nebraska Creighton. Evan, going to switch to spring football. Defense the theme with Tuesday's availability. Quarterbacks tomorrow with Coach Thomas and Sat as well. What do you think is truly fixable for Nebraska football from last year to this upcoming year that wasn't good enough? We can go down a whole laundry list of things that caused 5 and 7, but what are you confident Nebraska will be much better in doing when it comes to actual results and things that go into getting those desired results for Nebraska fans?
I mean, I think it's turnovers. That seems to be the obvious glaring example. Like you can talk about the quarterback conversation in a way that says, okay, what are some things that these quarterbacks can do that will help Nebraska win games? And you can talk about arm strength, you can talk about pocket presence, ability to scramble. But I think it starts with, especially in the context of last year, what can these quarterbacks do that prevent you from losing games? And when you look at last year, I think the quarterback directly was accountable for right around 30 giveaways, whether that was fumbles or interceptions. And you look at the rest of that group, the defense performed at a level that it really hadn't in about a decade. Some of the young skill guys are coming along. You have a veteran offensive line. But if you can't even hang on to the football, a lot of that's negated. So, like, I see the quarterback conversation starting at a point to where, okay, if you can just take care of the ball at sort of an average rate, and maybe you're not scoring touchdowns or points on every drive, but you're punting, you're playing the field position game, like paired with what the offense is and, some of those other assets I just mentioned, like that should be enough to swing you at least 2 games, in my opinion, moving forward. So find a way, if you're Glenn Thomas, Matt Rule, and Marcus Satterfield, like this is the time when you find what the skill sets are of your quarterbacks. You design your offense and your plays around those abilities, and you put them in the best position to succeed. And again, if you can avoid just some of those cataclysmic mistakes or mental mistakes or whatever it is, and just kind of play out the game and rely on that defense, I think that can make a big difference. So that's where I would start for sure.
It's Evan Bland with us here from the Omaha World Herald, Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, with the quarterbacks scheduled to meet with the media tomorrow, what is the most important insight that you think we can gain from the quarterbacks tomorrow, and specifically from a guy in Dylan Raiola who is still the presumptive starter?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm not exactly sure which quarterbacks we'll hear from. Maybe it'll be all 3 scholarship guys. But from the freshmen in particular, with Daniel Kalin as well, I think it would start with, hey, how are you adjusting to college? What have you learned about yourself, about your team, just in the couple months that you've been on campus? Everyone has kind of seen the stuff about this spring league that they have going on, dividing their roster into 3 teams. How's that going? How are the guys taken to being leaders as 18, 19-year-old guys who should be preparing for their proms here this month? Like, what does that look like? Is the speed of the game different? Have they or will they be taking any hits live this spring? What does that look like? So I think that's probably where I would start, just because, Raiola, Kalin, they've they've done plenty of interviews as recruits, but really the thing that's changed in the last few months has been their adjustment to college ball, the size. I mean, you hear from players years later when they talk about their welcome to college moment, it usually has to do with the strength and speed of the opposition, in this case, the defense that they're going against. So how that transition's going from their point of view, that's something I'll be interested to hear.
Evan, going to shift over to a story that's out from Dennis Dodd with CBS Sports, as he had a sit-down, Scott Frost speaking for the first time in 18 months. Did you have a chance to see that or look at it at all?
I did, yeah.
What's your takeaway here? Do we a year from now, are we talking about Scott Frost heading up a college football program? Do you see Scott Frost as an analyst or an assistant? What's your prediction here for Frosty? Do you think he gets back in?
Well, yeah. I mean, first, good on Dennis Dodd for getting the interview. I mean, Scott's been pretty quiet, off the radar for pretty much the entire time since he and Nebraska parted ways. I didn't know that there was a ton of earth-shattering content in the article itself. I mean, Scott didn't sound like he wanted to talk too much about his time at Nebraska or reflect too much on that. He kind of talked about how the game's changed, certainly with the portal and NIL and things like that. So, my opinion has been and kind of continues to be like he'll make a really good coordinator somewhere when he wants to. I think that, to me, just my opinion, I think that's where he would excel, where he can focus on the X's and O's, do a little bit of recruiting, but doesn't have to be the face of a program, doesn't have to deal with collectives and portal considerations as much as a head coach would have to. He's obviously a really smart football mind, right? He didn't forget how to be a good coach since he was guiding some of those Oregon offenses. So I imagine he'll get back into it at some point. Just the fact that he has $15 million in buyout cash from Nebraska, that affords you the ability to be picky, and that affords you the luxury of saying, hey, I'm going to sit out a little bit more and spend some time with my young kids. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like he's doing that. So whether it's in a year or 2 years or what have you, it does sound like he has that desire and that hunger to get back into coaching. And, I think as more time passes in Lincoln, there'll probably be more people that will be rooting for him to succeed at whatever that next stop is.
And Evan, do you think it's going to be necessary for him to publicly speak about what went wrong at Nebraska before he gets his next shot?
No, I don't think so. I think these things oftentimes don't work out for a whole bunch of reasons. Coaches get fired every year for an assortment of reasons. Obviously, his were on-field issues and just not being able to win. And but I think there's, you see it all the time. Matt Rule has come out and said, hey, maybe he's better qualified to be a head coach at the college level than in the NFL. Like sometimes you have to try these things, and then eventually, as you get older in your career, and I think this goes for a lot of careers, but you get older and you kind of find, where's the area that you're best at? Where's the area that gives you the most joy? I think Scott would probably tell you he had more fun as a coordinator at Oregon. He probably had more fun coaching UCF in a smaller conference than he did at Nebraska. So I think just kind of having that self-identity moving forward, a lot of that stuff will probably come out in job interviews, but I don't think there's probably any reason for him to talk publicly about it until he's doing a press conference at wherever his next job is.
Evan, what's coming up from you here, bud? About 30 seconds. What are you working on?
Well, I'll be at the baseball this weekend. Ohio State's in town, like we said. Excited to see how football plays out tomorrow with some of the quarterbacks. A few longer-term features kind of in the works here in the next few weeks as well. But it's kind of one of those times, a little bit slower with some of the on-field stuff, and kind of a good opportunity to reload and see what's coming up when these football games start to matter in the fall.
Evan, talk soon. Thank you much.
Thanks, guys.
Hail Varsity Radio is live. Now, back to Schmitty.
Schmitty's a great guy, but he don't have a brain.
And Elijah.
You want me to speak? When I point at you, yeah.
On Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you at Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager, Schmidt and Elijah Herbel, and Welcome in, Tim Verghese. He is joining us here for the first time, and hopefully not the last. Nebraska Rivals, and at Tim Verghese on Twitter, where you can follow him. Tim, nice to spend some time with you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Pleasure to connect. Glad I'm on here. Hope y'all can hear me okay.
We got you loud and clear, man. It's an exciting time in the world of recruiting, and I know you're all over it with Nebraska Rivals, and I wanted to kind of get some thoughts from you, and we'll start with a state that you're super familiar with, locked in with, and that's the state of Texas, and the rural Texas connection, how that continues to ramp up. What, from your vantage point, looks promising for Nebraska?
Yeah, Nebraska's done a good job there. Rule's been big there. His connections going back to Baylor. But more than him, honestly, it's been Garrett McGuire, man. Like that guy, everyone I've talked to down there, receiver, especially the Dallas area, receivers, of course, the Garrett's the guy, but for some of these other guys, even, DBs and all of that, they're connecting with Garrett. There's just a lot of ties down there. Obviously Garrett grew up there, was a quarterback down there. And just the family ties down there. So you're starting to see Nebraska start to make a little bit of a real name for themselves down there. That being said, even when I took this job, me and Zach, my boss, he was like, you can stay in Texas if you want, since Nebraska is recruiting down there so much. And I told him, I was like, I don't think you understand what Nebraska is doing in Texas. Like at this point, moving forward, Texas is going to be like complementary. The focus moving forward is going to be this 350 to 500 mile radius, but they're going to go into Texas for some of these elite 6A guys. They're going to go and find these guys that they, believe they have something that no one else does. And you're starting to see that, one name in particular, Romel Stevens down in Willis, Texas. He was a receiver for DJ Lagway, the 5-star who's now at Florida. 6'6", about 210. At this point, really raw, has about like 2-3 offers. Like, at this point, it's Nebraska and Arkansas State for him. So that kind of tells you about where his recruitment at. But Nebraska believes they have something there. That's a guy with very limited film, very, very limited even numbers, like statistics. But he's had a very good 7-on-7 season. This is a 6'6" guy that doesn't move anywhere close to like he's 6'6". Runs routes really well, gets really low on his breaks. And it's a guy that Garrett McGuire really loves, and Matt Rule's engaging with him on a near daily basis. That's a guy that if he's a take at Nebraska, I think Nebraska is going to end up getting him. But like it's Nebraska and Arkansas State, you know what I mean? Like this is one of those like eval type kids. At the higher end in Texas, they've got they're in it for Elijah Barnes, battling Texas and a couple other schools. That's one of the top linebackers in the state. I just tweeted out earlier today, but at his district track meet today, he recorded his best 100-meter time, a sub-11, which at 6'2", 225, really, really impressive. Another one, Michael Terry, that's a do-it-all athlete out of Alamo Heights. I put it on our board last week, just an update on him. That's a guy that a kid who grew up a Texas fan, wants to, if it works out, would love to be in Texas and stay in Texas. And Texas is doing everything they can to keep him in the state. But Nebraska's been in that recruitment a lot longer than Texas has. Nebraska was one of the first schools to offer, along with Texas Tech. And, I've basically what I was told from a source really close to the situation, pretty much verbatim, was, if Michael Terry chooses to leave the state, it's going to be Nebraska. And, it just says a lot about the effort Nebraska's done there for a guy that we have him as like a top 70 player in the country, a top 5 to 10 receiver in the country. He can play anything. He can play running back, he can play receiver, he can play safety, he can play linebacker, he can play DB. This is a guy that's going to contribute everywhere.
Tim Verghese with us here on Hail Varsity Radio, talking some recruiting. He's got ties down in Texas, spent a couple years covering Texas A&M recruiting. And Tim, in a big picture sense, I know Texas isn't the hotbed. It's not the place you want to turn into your pipeline with that 500-mile radius. But do you get the feel that Texas is more open for business now since Texas is left for the SEC? Do you feel more schools jumping into Texas, or do you think it's still status quo, more about who you know, Rule and his connections down there, along with Coach McGuire?
I think it is. It's still a who you know. Obviously, I think something you're seeing with the in the future, with these big two conferences, it kind of feels like, we're trending towards the SEC and the big, you are seeing a lot of the, like, Texas becoming more of a nationwide type state. Like Oregon's recruiting Texas now, Washington's recruiting Texas. USC has a presence in Texas. So it's really everywhere. Nebraska's very much, part of that group, and because of Rule and his ties, because of McGuire and his ties, and because of Knighton and his ties, because there's guys on the staff that have ties down there and they're doing really good work. So we'll see. I think it's going to be one of those things where I think Nebraska is going to end up moving forward. What you're going to see is they're going to have 5 to 10 commits maybe from Texas, but the majority of the class, like the bread of the class, is going to come from that 350-mile radius.
Tim Verghese with us, Nebraska Rivals, Hail Varsity Radio. Tim, what's your assessment here for Nebraska and what they want, what they like, who they've evaled at quarterback? And the name that pops up to me is TJ Lateef out of Orange County Lutheran. There's been other tires kicked, other quarterbacks looked at, but what do you like about Lateef, and how does Nebraska sit with him?
Yeah, so Nebraska's going to have Lateef here on campus here at the end of the month for the spring game. It's going to be his official visit. One of those visits where he feels like a guy that's it's getting there. It's almost decision time for him. He's trying to shut things down, trying to become a leader for his class, and kind of help some guys join him wherever he ends up, and a chance for Nebraska to really make a good impression. I like TJ. That's a very reliable. He's the perfect, if you're bringing in, like a 4-star quarterback or like a higher ranked quarterback after Dylan Raiola, he's the perfect type of guy. This is a guy that's going to be a very steady arm, really consistent arm, not going to blow you away with his measurables or any athletic testing or anything. But this is the guy that's just a very, very solid quarterback that can come in. He can learn the playbook. He can be a very steady arm, behind Dylan, behind Daniel. And, if Nebraska is the choice for him. That being said, on the recruiting side of things, there's a couple schools in the mix here. He's at Colorado this weekend, I believe. And, that Nebraska's, keeping some doors open. But TJ and just in general, the quarterbacks at the top this year, it really just depends on how certain dominoes fall. Like, for example, with TJ specifically, Texas is trying hard to hold on to their QB commit, KJ Lacey. Mm-hmm. Lacey's a kid out of Alabama, and Auburn's a couple schools are trying to keep Lacey closer to home. So, Texas is a school that, I've heard if Texas ends up losing their quarterback commit, they've already been back channeling with Lateef a little bit, and that's a guy that, they could end up going all in on. So all of a sudden you're back into a Nebraska-Texas recruiting battle there. Nebraska's keeping their options open too. Another name we've heard in recent weeks starting to pick up, mutual interest starting to pick up, Madden Ayamalieva, hard name to say. Nico's little brother, Nico, the 5-star who's at Tennessee currently. Madden's a real prospect in his own right. Give him some credit. I think threw for 3,500 yards this last year. Kind of stepping into the starting role for the first time. Not nearly as big as his brother. His brother's like 6'6". Not nearly as big, probably 6'4", 6'5". And again, not the same caliber as his brother, but this is a talented quarterback. And out of the West Coast as well. UCLA's working there, a couple other schools working there, but Nebraska's done good work there in recent weeks. And like I said, depending on how certain dominoes fall, I think Nebraska very well ends up with one of these two quarterbacks in their class.
Tim, before we talk about a couple of 2027 offers, what do you think in the class of 2025? If you had to power rank the positions of need, what are some positions you're looking at, and who are some guys you're looking at to fill those positions here as we get some visits through the spring and look ahead towards a big visit weekend of the spring game?
Yeah, just answered this question actually for our guys, and it was more so the question of which position group could benefit from a haul. I think you could do two different questions. If you're talking about the biggest needs, I would say linebacker. Nebraska's done some good work. The aforementioned Barnes, obviously in-state Christopher Jones. A couple of guys here where Nebraska's in, but they just had Noah Kareem McHale on campus. He's the number 3 linebacker in the country per Rivals. They had him on campus yesterday. But linebacker is a position I think Nebraska could really use, just a really good recruiting class in. That's one of those positions where they're kind of young and unproven right now, outside of John Bullock of the guys on campus right now. And you could really use some infusion there. Offensive line as well. They're in on a lot of names over there. I actually broke down 15, 20 names that they're currently in on our board. You can go find that at InsideNebraska.com. But some of the headliners to know at offensive line, they've got to replace Turner Corcoran. They've got to replace both tackles, Ben Scott as well. All those guys out of eligibility. You could see some declarations potentially as well. So they're in it for Houston Keana Torres. He's a center out of Hawaii, number 3 or 4 center in the country. We've got him ranked, and he's set to visit later this month. Nebraska's really in it with him. Jack Lang out of Eureka, Missouri. He's probably one of Nebraska's top offensive tackle targets. He was back on campus 2 weeks ago. And an interesting note here, Nebraska's battling Notre Dame, Michigan, a couple other programs for him. Michigan appears to be the biggest threat right now, but really interesting thing, when he was on campus, he had dinner went out to dinner the day before spring ball started with Dylan Raiola and the entire offensive line room. And for him, he was talking to that group. He was like, I couldn't tell who the veterans were and who the young guys were. And, just noticed how close this culture is here. And he just told me straight up, the thing he's looking for at the next level is a brotherhood and development. And so far, Donovan Raiola, Dylan Raiola, and the offensive line group, they've really answered and checked a lot of boxes for him. He's planning to return for an official visit in the summer. Nebraska's going to get that final official visit from him. And, expecting a commitment from him in the summer, and that's going to be tough. Michigan's the biggest threat right now. In-state Missouri's pushing, a couple other schools pushing. So it's a couple of schools involved, but Nebraska's done really good work early there. And then, like I said, there's 15, 20, offensive tackles at this point they're in on. John Mills is another one to know. He's out of San Francisco, 6'6", 320 with 34-inch arms, just a large human being. He's coming down on campus on April 9th for an unofficial visit, and then he's returning for an official visit for the spring game. That's another guy to know at offensive tackle. It's a big group.
Tim, I need more time. We'll do it again soon and get look at some of the in-state prospects. Good to meet you, and thanks for the info today, man.
Likewise.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, where you can get the podcast, can see the video of Hail Varsity. Hail Varsity YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Big thanks to Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. That recruiting, always exciting to talk recruiting. We welcome in Dr. Brandon Seifert, Nebraska Orthopedic Center, a Jock Doc Wednesday. Dr. Brandon, how we doing? Thanks for a few minutes.
You bet, Chris. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
We're good, man. We're fired up as spring football's rocking and rolling. NCAA tournaments alive and well. Baseball's going, man. It's a good time of year, and so many athletes are multi-sport performers. And I wanted to get into the topic, and I've had a couple of buddies have this happen to them. Now, they will lie to you about how good their career scoring average was or what their 40 time was or used to be. But they blew their left knee out, ACL, got recovered from that, and then later on in their high school career, they had it happen to the other knee. Let's talk about that phenomenon of having two knee injuries, having the ACL issue to each knee.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So, definitely something we worry about. We've been worried about it for, quite some time in the orthopedic world. Honestly, there hasn't been a ton of studies done looking at this. There's been some older data that's out there. Some of that older data is kind of based off some, 1990s, early 2000s kind of data. And that kind of original data that came out then actually showed somewhere around almost a 30 to 35% chance of injuring the ACL on the opposite side of where you had your first injury was kind of the risk that was out there for those athletes. There's been some subsequent studies that have been done, actually a really nice study that was done here put out in about 2021 that looked at this kind of issue. And so for us, we talk about, the opposite knee would be what we call contralateral. So contralateral knee or ACL injuries is kind of the term we're looking at. And so some of the newer studies, that kind of recurrent risk has actually gotten a lot less than what it was kind of in those original studies. Clearly there needs to be kind of more work. You need more kind of sample size to be quite a bit larger than what they had. But in their study, it showed that potential to injure that other knee, in terms of an ACL injury, if you've already had it on the other side, that contralateral knee or ACL injury, somewhere on the order anywhere from about 1.5 all the way up to even 9 or 10% in the study. So still pretty sizable. And I think the important thing as you look at those data is that you actually have a higher risk of tearing the other side, the original ACL side, than you do the operative side as you kind of go back and play sports. Obviously, those percentages change depending on what activities you're doing. At least to some extent, if you go back and you play high-level sports, and a contact sport, then that potentially is going to be even higher. And so that's kind of how we look at it. It makes us nervous. I think as you look at that number, and as things have changed, especially as you look at kind of the older data, and it showed that re-injury risk was a bit higher on the other side in the past than what the new study showed, you may start asking questions about why is that number maybe a little bit lower now than it was in the past. If you were to speculate on that, I think that some of our rehab techniques probably have helped that, because as we take athletes to a rehab program after having ACL reconstruction on one side, we're typically, at least folks who do a lot of ACLs, are having them really focus in on doing the exercises or biomechanical improvement that they need for both of the knees, even though the other side is the one you're working on that you basically had surgery on.
It's Dr. Brandon Seifert with us here at Jock Doc Wednesday on Hail Varsity Radio. And Dr. Brandon, from your perspective as a doctor talking return to play, do you think there's a better prognosis for an athlete that tears an ACL in each knee as opposed to tearing an ACL in the same knee twice? What's your take on that? Would you rather, as a doctor, see it in separate knees or in the same knee? If you have to see it, I should say.
Yeah, that's a great question. We know that the data that's out there about having so for example, if you had an ACL reconstructed and then you re-injure that, so now you need what we call a revision ACL. We know that those return to play rates, those functional rates, the kind of patient satisfaction scores are not as good that second time as the first. But even as you start to venture into those athletes now that have had ACLs done on both sides, but not revisions, just kind of primary repairs, even that data shows that those athletes don't return quite as well or play quite as well or kind of reach that patient satisfaction score that one would have if you just had one, of course. I still think the numbers are a bit higher in terms of those satisfaction scores and return to play level if you've had just a primary on each side. If you've had like a revision ACL, those return to play satisfaction scores are still a little bit less than that other scenario you named. But an interesting question nonetheless.
Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. We're talking that dreaded knee injury to the other knee after you've had work done on the other knee. So do you see this happen in one sport specifically, or if you were to, I guess, ballpark it, what sports it more likely to happen in? Is it soccer? Is it basketball? Is it hockey, football, or does it just kind of sprinkle everywhere?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. There's a lot of studies going on right now looking at kind of sport. We're doing so many more ACLs than you've probably ever done in the past, and also just that whole concept of kids are playing sports younger, a lot higher volume, so we're just seeing this explosion in ACL injuries just in general. And so it lends an opportunity to have more, unfortunately, sample size of each of these sports to really figure out what are the trends for re-injury in those different sports. And as you look at those, what we definitely see is on the female side, we tend to see a higher re-injury rate on the female side. There are some studies out there that do contradict that a little bit, but the vast majority of the trend is females tend to have a higher re-injury risk than males do after ACL. And then the other thing is there are some sport-specific things that do tend to be a bit higher. Again, a lot of it trends in the female direction, so it's a little bit higher. And then soccer, of course. Soccer has really been trending upward just in terms of number of injuries in soccer and also kind of the re-injury risk. If you ask me what's my biggest concern for an athlete going back after ACL, what sport would worry me the most, I would say a female athlete going back and playing soccer is probably the one that probably worries us the most in terms of re-injury risk. That's probably the one that's probably the highest. You'll see it more commonly if they're going to have a re-injury on the operative side.
Dr. Brandon here, before we get you out, do you think turf fields have anything to do with that in soccer? As the soccer nut, the resident one here on Hail Varsity Radio, a lot of European
You just like
teams
drinking at 7 a.m. on Sundays.
No comment. But you look at the World Cup, you look at European soccer, a lot of those teams refuse to play on artificial turf at all because of the knee injury risk. You don't see that in MLS or college soccer or high school soccer as much in the United States. Can you look at that as being a reason why you have the knee injuries in soccer like we're seeing in recent years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's actually a lot of studies that have kind of been launched looking at that very issue. I think as you look at different factors, you start asking questions about why are we seeing this kind of explosion in injuries. I think that's one of those things that's on the list of, okay, how much has this contributed to this? So I think we're going to have some answers on that here in the next couple of years. There's a few preliminary studies coming out that are showing a trend in that direction. So I think that's probably going to be the case. And then the question becomes, how much of a risk is that? And, one, is it even statistically significant of a risk? And then two, so what if that does turn out to be the case? What do we do about, this is going to make a very interesting question about what do you do about these nice, beautiful turf facilities that have been put in? Do you see a move, kind of back towards grass, which I think at a high level where the funds are there, if these studies, I'm not saying they are, but if these studies turn out to be the case, then I think you'll see a big, obviously, trend back in your professional, those sports that are well-funded will be able to move back to that grass field would probably be the trend, but you'd have to have some pretty significant, solid data to move that.
Dr. Brandon, thanks for the update today.
You bet, fellas. You guys take care.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Locked and loaded today. Big thanks to Mike Babcock, Tim Verghese, of course, Evan Bland, Dr. Brandon Seifert, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, where you can get the pod, and the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Go check that out. The rewinds on different platforms. Hail Varsity Twitter at HVarsity Radio. Give that a follow. AM 590 Omaha's ESPN can catch us there. KFOR Facebook and Twitter. Central Nebraska Superstation. Kearney Hastings, Grand Island. 1460, 1550. News Talk 900 Columbus. And I'm out of breath with where you can get us. I appreciate all of that. And that was fun today. We'll check in with Gary Barnett tomorrow, his take on Frost and that second act potentially in Frosty's career with the Dennis Dodd article. Of course, the sports execs are huddling up. Stuart Mandel from The Athletic. Really cool story on a 80-team Super League. Where does Nebraska fit into that landscape? Tonight, Average Joe Sports Show pod taping. We get to hang out with Mitch Sherman and Bill Dolman. That'll drop tomorrow at some point.
I am thinking I should be able to have it up by your morning commute tomorrow. So that will involve some work for me tonight. I'm not opposed to a late night of work. I think that's what it's going to be, so I can have it for you. I know it's been a while since the last time we dropped an Average Joe Sports Show podcast, so I think I'm going to do some late night work and get that up for the folks by the morning commute tomorrow. I think in 6:30 in the morning.
And we'll have a Hurrdat Sports pod with Jabba Chamberlain and the Triple Play pod Friday for you to get you ready for Nebraska, Ohio State, and some MLB. We're going to talk Jabba into telling us stories about Whitey Ford and Old Timers Day. Let's just, all right, spill the beans. It's okay. Let's go there. But I do want to smile out loud about the dinner tonight. I get to go to dinner. My mother's coming back in from Phoenix, which is awesome. I've even talked the wife into meeting me downtown.
Ooh.
So
without giving any free shout-outs, what's the cuisine of choice tonight? How are you going to
We are going to try and get into a new restaurant that is highly recommended by, or newer restaurant that's highly recommended by Matt Rule.
I know exactly which restaurant you're talking about.
So I am rolling the dice that there's room for us at 6:30-ish.
Did Matt text you directly and say, Schmitty, you got to try this spot?
No, I am not tight with Matt Rule that way. Hopefully someday, but no. I did not. We were going to play paper, rock, scissors for who gets the bill. We being my wife and my mother. I'm staying out of that competition.
Well, see, I've been on my diet plan here, so I have a lovely dinner of
rice, chicken,
beans, and chicken.
All right.
I cannot wait. Really looking forward to that.
We got to do a grill get-together. We got to figure out a Friday when the wind's not going 1,000 miles per hour. And like we did for the Michigan State game, they gave up no first downs and lost in overtime. That grill out where we did short ribs on the smoker. I
was thinking about throwing something on the smoker, not this weekend, but next. We have the combination of both the Masters and UFC 300, so I might throw something.
Well, yeah, the
in
NFL draft that's happening shortly.
Yeah, the Broncos scare me there.
How about Randy Gregory?
Oh, the Bucks.
Yes, Randy and Levante. Boom.
The Husker fan in me smiles. The Broncos fan in me hates it and wants Randy Gregory out of the league. But that's my personal bias from being a Broncos fan and the years of pain I've had to endure. So
good enough, man. Get that Tampa gear bought and purchased. Back tomorrow at 4 with Hail Varsity, powered by Cornhead Lager. Thank you.